of their own.
Yeah, also, I think that world building doesn't necessarily require a density of description. If you look at like Elmore Leonard's books, and he creates some of the best worlds around. Good luck finding anything other than dialogue in an Elmore Leonard book. He doesn't write a lot of description, but that doesn't mean that the world isn't fully alive and very real. Because that's what would always kind of flip me out, was sitting there going, geez, well, if I want this to feel real and detailed and I want to get a pat on the back, I got to put in a ton of description. And I think it's not always necessary, and a lot of times it's kind of like what you were saying, it's not always desirable, because you don't want to stop your narrative, you don't want to kill your characters. You really just put in as much as you think you need to advance the story, advance the characters, and be fun. But I would say, I wouldn't feel a need to just pile on tons and tons of detail, unless that's just what jazzes you, and there's people out there that like that. But
Tolkien managed it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Tolkien managed. This is the kind of thing. Tolkien right now gets a pass because he's a classic. Okay, you take a look at that. You take a look at the Lord of the Rings books. You take a look at Starship Troopers. If they were being published today, they'd be rejected or sent back for heavy rewrites. Okay, so this is one of the saddest things that I see. Because a lot of people, I do a lot of how to write classes. I got a seminar on Sunday morning here, and one of the saddest things that I get are people that come up to me and say, "I'm going to write a book just like the book that I read when I was a kid." Well, if the person is 18 and they're referring to when they were 14 and they were reading James's stuff, okay, you got a shot. Okay, if they're 54 and they're referring to the books they were reading when they were 14, find a time machine, because those books aren't selling to today's audience. So you really have to be aware, and you have to look at back in those days, pre-television, when movies were very special, when you were less dependent on graphic representations, when readers were more used to reading more in the way of description, you could get away with a lot of that stuff. Now, not so much. I mean, my rule is 2 paragraphs of description and then do something interesting. And then something blows up, someone says something, or something dies. Yeah, that's exactly it.
Or all three in one sentence.
Well, yeah, there you go.
A few years ago, I wrote a Friday the 13th movie, and the producer of that movie, he had a rule: every 3 minutes you had to have either boobs or blood.
There you go.
That was how we had to write the movie.
Or tasings.
Yeah.
Well, description can easily blend into action. It's one thing to describe your horrible monster's teeth, and it's another thing to describe it from the inside, as they're chewing you.
Yeah, describing teeth versus describing the bite.
Yeah.
Much better.
And a lot of that comes down to focus, and how you don't always have to think in broad, panoramic viewpoints, describing countryside and so forth. Or, if you see the horrible monster, you don't have to describe how vast it is and how huge the dragon is and how big its wings are or whatever. It can be really effective to describe only that which the characters would notice. Like if a huge dragon is somewhere and you're right close by it, you're probably not thinking, "Oh God, I should write 4 paragraphs right now describing this." You're probably thinking, "Well, those are pretty big teeth. I think I'm just going to go over here."
The best idea I got about world building came from a comics writer, a guy named Alan Moore, who was a big influence on my work. And he wrote, "You have to know as the writer how everything works, just in case. You're not going to tell a fraction of that stuff to your reader. But you need to know how the economic systems work. You need to know how all these things function in the world that you've created. And you're going to have these big, thick file folders full of this crap that is never going to go anywhere near the printed page of your book. But if you need to be able to refer to something, it helps that you know what all the background of that is. Because what the research is for, what the world building is for, is authenticity. It has to sound authentic. You have to be able to write things that make the settings and the characters and those events feel authentic. I use lots of real world characters in my books. Real fictional, there we go.
Real fictional. A step more fictional than
I'm
everyone
crossing
else.
so many lines with that stuff. Real people play a lot of the characters in my books. The main three characters that, for the benefit of people that haven't heard about these books, we don't give it away. It's people you know. The three main characters are people, you know who they are. And I give that surprise away at the end of book one. And I've continued that with the other books, using real-life scientists and authors and artists from throughout the centuries. My current favorite I'm writing about is a great inventor of time travel devices who happens to be William Shakespeare. And he was always kind of soft-spoken about this, didn't want to come out and say he was an adept at time travel devices, because then people would start fawning over him for his sonnets, and he'd get embarrassed about it. But it's really Shakespeare that I have as this character in these books. I had one character talking with some of the others in the last book, and my editors sent me a note and said, James, we've had all the assistants researching this, we had our copy editor research this, we can't find any actual references to back up, you know, what your character's doing here. We can't find anything about that character at all. And I said, that's because I made him up.
I guess
I've done some successful world building here. If I've convinced an entire editorial department that the fictional character is so real, they'll spend 3 days trying to find references on Google. The character that I just got, this sounds pretty good.
So much for an Ivy League education.
We have to ask our moderator if we've got a direction that he wanted us to
We
be
want
on.
to talk. I'm enjoying the conversation at hand, so
Just throw another piece of meat in the alligator pit.
did you want to have the audience ask
Yeah,
a question?
sure.
As far as your alternate history books,
Hmm?
how much world building or extra world building did you find necessary?
Well, I think with any of these, you know, the idea of world building really comes down to world understanding. So for doing, At the Queen's Command is set in a world which is, the politics are very much like the American colonial period. Changed a lot of the names and everything like that. Certainly for weaponry, for war, for price scales, I can do a lot of historical research very directly there. For the politics, because I'm not using actual history, I have to, you know, just reshape things so I'm getting those same forces and I'm getting the same pressures brought in. So yeah, there's an unbelievable amount of it in terms of the number of books that I've had to read, just reams and reams and reams of notes that are taken so that I have reference work to go back to. And it's not only going to be for the historical stuff, but also just for the backgrounds of the characters. You know, trying to remember if you mention offhand that someone has got some cousins who lived in the lake region of this particular colony, you better make a note of that. Because if you get it wrong, someone's going to scream at you. So basically what you're doing is you're defining your own reality as you build the world. Then you've got to make sure that you understand how that works. And as everybody's alluded to here, sometimes you do things, or you ask questions, or you set stuff up that rolls in a whole set of consequences that then causes you to have to reshape what you thought was the background of the world. And so you try and make sure to finesse things. Another secret that I will give you all is simply this. There are two ways to reveal a fact in a novel. One is a narrator interjection. This is where the narrator states, the troll came out of the woods, and like all trolls, it was 8 feet tall. That is the narrator stating that all trolls are 8 feet tall. Or you have characters discussing trolls, and one says, well, I've seen a bunch of them, and in my time, most of them are 8 feet tall. I've heard of some being taller, and there might be a couple that are smaller, but they're mostly 8 feet tall. Well, what you've done there, because it's a character, from a character's point of view, that character can be wrong. Okay, you've given yourself some flexibility. Because the second you have the narrator state that all trolls are 8 feet tall, you need a dwarf troll. Okay, you just need that talks like a Scotsman and knows badgers and try to do you absolutely need one. So you provide yourself that sort of slip space, and you will see this happens a lot in novels where an author will have stated certain things as a narrator in the first couple of books in a series, and then will have to finesse it because they realize they've painted themselves into a corner. And so you'll see them doing all sorts of weird things and totally artificial things to give them this break. Whereas if you just remember, state all fact from the point of view of a character. The earmark phrase that I always use is, "to the best of my knowledge," and as long as any fact is stated with that qualifier, then you are good to go, and that gives you flexibility for adapting story pieces as you go along.
But you can actually, when you're writing a series, you can respond to things like that. Like I had one of the characters quoting Milton in one of the earlier books, and one of the big reviewers said, James has all these literary characters running around in here, and then he misquotes. That wasn't Milton that said that, that was John F. Kennedy. Oh, okay, it was Kennedy misquoting Milton. I got my character quoting Milton, but it was Kennedy's quote. I thought, well, how do I fix this? Well, that's the benefit of having time travel. And I have the character, climbing up this rope ladder, and a book drops out of his pocket, and one of them says, "What the hell is this?" Quotations from U.S. presidents. All these wise things he's been saying this whole time, he's getting them out of these books. And I kind of finessed it in that way. The reviewer caught that too. But every once in a while, again, to kind of circle this back to world building, if you create that sort of environment where it's authentic, where it feels authentic, then you find these opportunities that just sort of naturally spring up in your stories. One of the main characters I have, one of my main time travelers, is Hank Morgan, who was the Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court. Because one of my caretakers of this book of maps was Mark Twain. So he wrote a fictional book about a real person he knew named Hank Morgan, who was a time traveler. Well, Hank Morgan, at one point, in one of the latter books, I needed one of these special time travelers to disappear. And I wanted to turn him into a pirate. So I could open up the first chapter in the book with a ghost pirate showing up in Oxford. A ghost pirate. Had to put that in chapter 1. Then I realized that the pirate, Hank Morgan, in the real history and the research I'd done about pirates for the Pirate Atlas I had done a few years before, no one knew anything about Henry Morgan until the age of 33. Nothing about him. Went back to my research, Mark Twain, talking about Hank Morgan. Oh, I figured he's a man in his early 30s. And I thought, oh, thank God. Because I'm going to look so clever for doing this. And it's all accidental, but it all got set up. That Hank Morgan got lost in history, kept his name, became the infamous pirate Henry Morgan, and persisted as a ghost into the future to pass this message on to his friends. But it all worked in the context of, is this the real world? Are these real people? Are they fictional? And it all kind of wove together.
Yeah, there's amazing stuff that you learn in research. Like when I was doing at the Queen's Command, you have to use magic to be able to shoot guns. And I wanted to, but it's all flintlocks and muskets and those things. I wanted one of my characters to be very good and to have an actual rifle as opposed to a musket. And I also decided that I wanted to be a breech loader. And there was, during the Revolution, it was the Ferguson rifle, which was a breech loader, but was really clumsy the way it worked and not very effective for what I was doing. So, because of the way magic worked in here, I modified a design. I made up my own little design, made some little drawings and little charts, and it would work beautifully, and it would be fun, and this guy could shoot really, really fast, and it would be great. And as I continued to do research, I found out that that design was patented in 1812. I was like, okay, well, I'm not as smart as I thought I was, but, but these are the fun things, and you get those little serendipitous moments where you're able to link this stuff, back and forth, and for me, here I thought I made that design up, But now I describe it with the actual design that was patented. Well, 999 out of 1,000 people are going to read that description and not think anything of it, or just their eyes are going to glaze over and they'll blip past it. They won't care. But there will be that one gun nut who will go, I know that! Oh, man! And that's always important. You need to find your fringe constituency and appeal to them.
That's the guy that sits at the back of his writing seminars holding a lighter.
What I think we're saying a lot is that these tiny ideas can grow, and the more you chase, and like with ghost pirates and whatever you want, it's fantasy. We got into this just so we can do whatever the hell we want. And just by starting with that, I want a ghost pirate. Why? Because pirates and ghosts, and these can evolve into something so much bigger if you just follow them. And I think when world building feels really static is when no one asks, oh, where did the ghost pirate come from? Or, where did this type of gun come from? So ultimately, you might chase an idea that you take it to its logical conclusion and find that it's completely useless and you have to scrap the whole thing. But you kind of have to chase it to know. And I think a lot of the most satisfied world building comes from those small things that got chased down by the author and taken to their conclusion. In these books, there are wizards who have figured out that magic is just an amplification of bodily processes. So, no. Not yet. So they figure, oh, well, there's heat inside us. We can turn that into fire pretty easily. We can freeze the moisture in our breath to create ice. So it sort of wound up going way off the typical idea of mystical guys in robes. They are very militant, hardcore scientists who resent everyone else trying to accredit things to God and divine, and they resent the term magic, basically. And I chased that down because if you know how magic works, you might be a little more militant and logistical about it. And likewise, that gave rise to a scene in Black Halo in which someone loses complete control of his magic and his bodily processes. And yeah, you can go there now. Because it does result in his urine catching fire. And sort of staring at, oh, well, this is a
Friday night in Tempe.
Yeah, sit there and go, oh, well, this is a problem. And seeing how that affects him, and because naturally he's a little freaked out. Urine is on fire, as well we might all be. But that's the magic system in a way that relates to the character, so that it's not just a bunch of, rules that don't come into play. Consequences, feeding characters, feeding consequences.
I think it's really important. It's really important, especially with magic systems, to do that, because really in a lot of fantasy, and in really bad fantasy, all you have is flashbang magic. You point a finger and you get an effect, and it's not at all intriguing. It's not at all complex. It's just really lousy. It's sort of the balloon animal version of what magic ought to be. It is a balloon animal, it's not a real animal. So I think having good magic systems, making sure, and especially time travel, is another thing of that, bending reality. Making sure that reality bends along the lines of rules, because readers want to try and figure this stuff out. You want to be able to have an inkling of where the ghost pirates may have come from, or how this is going to turn out. And that's some of the most fun is in a book you present an idea and you know that the reader is going to take some time and go, oh man, if this happens like this and this goes like that, then there's a lot of trouble coming down the line. And then I think they really appreciate it. I surely know I do as a reader. really appreciated watching how the writer handles those sort of difficulties, the way the writer gets himself out of trouble.
I actually had a sequence in one of the Mythworld novels. Now keep in mind, these were the first prose novels I'd written. It was the editor is a famous author in Germany who was a fan of my comic books that I'd done, and he asked if I wanted to write these prose novels. And I hit one, and this stayed in the book. This stayed in the book. The timing of things in this story had to be precise. It had to do with an opera in Europe, the Wagner Festival, the Ring operas. So the timing, I'd set this up, so certain things happened in the spring, and then I went and looked up when the operas take place and realized in my timeline, I was off by 6 weeks for everything happening in the story. But there had to be a translation of an ancient manuscript that happened somewhere in the middle. And so I basically set up a scene where the guy says, all right, we're going to get to work. I don't know how long this is going to take us, but you know what? I don't want to be interrupted. So he unplugged the phone. Next paragraph. 6 weeks later, he plugged the phone back in and made a call.
When you're world building, and say you have you're also basing off of an ancient histories or like ancient societies, things like Atlantis, things like that. Do you feel you have to world build that ancient world as well as the modern world, or can you just leave the ancient more just to a few details that you bring in?
I think it goes back to what I was saying, which is whatever you're going to do, it's got to sound authentic. I have Atlantis coming up in the last Imaginarium Geographica book. I have piles of books about Atlantis. I wanted all the myths. I wanted the good stories. I wanted the crappy stories, so you know what had been done before that people thought sucked. So you don't do that. And it had to fit in the context. You know, this is the 7th novel. It had to fit with the world building I'd done in 6 other books. So whatever I do with that Atlantis, and I'd like to think I've made it my own take on it. Atlantis is just one of the names for this place. I wanted to tie that name into it to evoke these ideas and the preconceived notions that people have, but it's still going to be my world. And as long as it sounds authentic, I mean, that's what you go for. If you start worrying too much about what kind of details you're going to need, if you get away from the story you're actually telling, then you're looking in the wrong direction, I think.
I think also if you're going to base it on, there's a difference between basing it on something historical and basing it on something mythical. If you're going to base it on something mythical, you've got a lot more flexibility to deal with it. So, you know, in researching Atlantis, for example, you might want to get a sense of what Atlantis means to other people, you know, what the common myths are about Atlantis, so that whatever you construct would fit in there or could be the source for all of those myths. If, on the other hand, you're going to base it on Troy, you know, you're going to have to drill down and actually understand how Troy worked, understand what all of that meant, and then have that be plausible. Because one of the difficulties that we have, and this is really important in world building, and the people who don't do it run afoul of this, is that if you make a mistake, a glaring error in the world as we know it, it used to be people would just throw the book across the room. Now they go to their computer, they blog about the fact that you suck. Okay? And this is really important. So if it's going to be historical and it's going to be important, you've got to do all the research and you've got to know it really, really well. If it's not going to be important, then you're going to be able to fudge some of those details. And again, you use the, let's say, you know, you were going to have this Atlantean artifact, okay? And it's going to be a modern day story, and the Atlantean artifact is the MacGuffin. It's the thing that they're hunting. So it's kind of a Raiders of the Lost Ark kind of story, okay? Then it is, to the best of my knowledge, or the stories say this thing comes from Atlantis. And in Atlantis, they used to be able to do this with it. Okay, then we know it's all make-believe and we don't have to worry about it. Okay, if you're going to say, hey, this came from ancient Troy during the time when Helen was there, then you better be able to state facts and defend it so that somebody who's actually done the archaeological digs would read the book and go, oh, okay, that works. And when I was doing the X-Wing books, I'm not a pilot, but when I was doing the X-Wing books, I learned, I talked to pilots, I flew flight simulators, I watched countless documentaries, I was reading tons of biographies about pilots, how squadrons worked, how all of those things worked. The greatest compliment I had was pilots would ask me what I flew, because I had gotten the stuff right. And so that's where it's critical. And if pilots think I got that right, then they're going to be recommending those books to other pilots and to people who aren't pilots.
Pilot demographic.
What's that? I kind of like that. I'm hoping, when they're up front driving and they read the passenger manifest, they go, okay, we're not going to crash today, because, it's getting another book due out. So, but you want to do that, because, again, you want to make sure that you can make all of these readers happy, because, a happy reader is going to tell 4 or 5 other people that this is a great book. An unhappy reader is going to tell 100 people, don't waste your money. And they will do it very vociferously, especially in Amazon reviews. And I mean, just economically, that can be make or break. The fact that you see, you go to look at a book and you see that it's only got 1.5 stars. You're not even going to bother to click on it to find out what people are saying. Which may be, I hate this cover, which has nothing to do with the book. And you get a bunch of people giving it 1 star because they don't like the cover. Or as we have had recently, publishers were publishing ebooks at a higher than $10 price. And so people were going in on Amazon giving those books 1-star reviews simply because of what the publisher said put as a price point, having nothing to do with what's in the book or whether or not anyone would enjoy it. So you don't want to give people those excuses. Making sure that you get facts right, having done your research, exceedingly important.
We're actually almost out of time. Is there anything else you just want to quickly sum up, reflect on, any last minute?
I'm afraid Sam will tase me if I say.
Go ahead. I want to hear what all you have to say before
I think
throw it all out.
all of us are sitting out in the author ghetto that they have set up for us, and we just encourage you to, come by and check out some of the stuff we've got. I think all of us have got some new projects in the works that we're all excited about, and
What booths?
I'm 633.
Yeah, 635.
We're all in
So
it.
they've got us in a row.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They can
And
keep
if
an
there's
eye on us.
anything you
It's
want-
like a
Sam's on the other side of the tracks from us.
I'm not in the cool kids.
No. He's out of taser range.
With the other jerks. I'm not even allowed to look over there. We all have to turn around and stare at the black felt. But it's probably safe to say that if you had any questions that you had a burning desire, or even just, a mildly uncomfortable desire to ask, come talk to us. We have absolutely nothing better to do.
And I'm drawing dragons for a lot of the people that brought kids. They don't have to be my books. I'll draw them in Sam's books or Mike's books.
Without even being asked.
Anything that'll sell a book.
He will actually draw them on people.
Well, thank you for coming, and I guess have a good day. And Michael,
Thanks for
Dean, James, and Sam.
Thank you guys all for being
Thanks.
such a great idea.